Evening. So, the start of a brand new series on the channel. This is going to be 40k lore, and one which I've wanted to do for some time. Yes, the magic video for Warhammer Old World is coming next few days. I'm just making sure that I've got all my sources ready for that, and that all my info is right and correct before I commit to recording it. But yeah, I wanted to do some lore on Warhammer 40,000, the setting. Now, for a long time I thought, where was the best place to start? And I know Lewittin, by the way, if you're expecting videos of that quality, I'm afraid I don't have 1 million subscribers, so I won't be giving you that much time. But in terms of my videos, I know he started out with going way back to the early foundation of the setting and things like that. I don't want to do that. I want to cut straight to the quick. His videos are amazing if you want to get into the nitty-gritty of how the Warhammer universe was formed, how the Imperium first came around, then great. Those videos are there for you. These videos are more of a, hey, are you new to the hobby? Do you want to get into an army? Okay, well, sit down, let me tell you about an army today. Or, hey, are you already doing your army? Do you want to hear about a bit of lore for 45 minutes straight? Okay, then sit down, let's have a little talk. That's what this is going to be about, basically. I'm not going to go into too much detail on the lore itself. I'm not going to go in and start, going through every single bit of nitty-gritty part of the lore. I'm literally going to give you an overview of lore that I find interesting, of themes I find interesting in Warhammer 40,000, and why I find them interesting. We're going to go through, in 3 parts, generally every single video of these is going to be in 3 parts. We're going to go over the lore, just as it is, okay? So what happened in the lore, the main part, not going into too much detail, because we don't want to be here all day. But then we're going to do a lore exploration, okay? So we're going to see what kind of things were affecting the lore. Where did Games Workshop get their inspiration from? What are some of the intricacies of the lore? Where do they fit in the real world? What was pulled from the real world to create this bit of lore? And then at the end, I'm going to be discussing what I would change about the lore going forward. Okay, so what I think does and doesn't work about the lore going forward. So, first of all, I wanted to do the Space Marine Legions, the Legiones Astartes from Warhammer 30,000, I suppose, the Horus Heresy. We're going to be going through each and every single one of these legions. I may do a video for the Lost Legions at some point, but that is a much harder video to do because there are a lot of conflicting sources out there about those 2 Lost Legions. And to be fair, I think I'd rather leave them lost. I'd rather let you guys just go ham with those legions if you ever wanted to, those 2 Lost Legions. So, what we do have is 18 legions. So there'll be 18 videos going forwards, and each will be fitting into that similar style. Now, I wanted to start with the Dark Angels for 2 reasons. Number 1, I like things being in chronological order because I'm a historian and I like doing things that way. And number 2, well, look at the picture that I'm showing you right now. This is my favourite picture from Warhammer 40,000. Like, the total sum of all pictures in Warhammer 40,000, this is my favourite. Okay? Everything about this screams, you need to collect and paint me, to me. The one thing that's always held me back from collecting Dark Angels is because there are certain parts of their lore that I find really tiresome and boring, which I'll get into later. But at this stage, this picture, this is the reason why I got into Grey Knights. This picture, okay? Literally this picture here. If you look at the enamel on the sword, the blade work, look at the way the light's playing on it, you look at the way that there are angular lines on all of the armor, you look at the way that it is actually Space Marine, you can tell it's a Space Marine, but it's angled, it's different, it's ornate. There are robes flowing in and out of the armor. Okay, so this is somebody who has got... It's a work of art as much as it is a piece of battlefield technology. And I've always loved this about Warhammer 40,000. And the very reason why my own chapter, the channel's chapter, is a Dark Angel successor is because of this picture. Because the Iron Talons, when we will get into them as the first homebrew chapter we're going to cover, are essentially knights/samurai in space. Essentially, that's all they are. They're noble families. They only ever take people from noble families on their home world. They don't recruit from anywhere else. You know, they're quite tragic in their backstory too. They lose most of their gene seed and things like that. So they are a dying chapter. But we'll get into them at a different date. But here we have the very reason why I love Dark Angels so much in an artistic sense, which is why I find them quite frustrating, because I'm not a big fan of their lore in general. But one part of their lore that I really like, that I've always loved, is Caliban itself. So Caliban obviously isn't a world that's in Warhammer 40,000 anymore. This was destroyed in the Horus Heresy by the Dark Angels when they came back and they fought against the traitor Fallen. But we'll get into that. So Caliban, it was a death world covered by a multitude of a few cities, but the rest of the world is literally a blanketed forest region full of corrupted monsters. And if you look at where Caliban is on the galaxy map, it is quite near to the Eye of Terror. So the warp is having a definite effect on Caliban as we're going through. And the beasts that are on this world are generally chaos-corrupted monstrosities. These are things that are going to be coming after you and tearing you limb from limb, essentially. And it is not a technologically advanced world, in a weird way. This picture, obviously, is taken at the very height of the Great Crusade. This is centuries after the Imperium has come and actually established cities in Caliban. Like, as in technological cities in Caliban. But before then, it is very much a feudal, knightly society with realms and cities all of their own. That is something that I really, really, really enjoyed about the Dark Angels, is the fact that they come from this place that is extremely feudal. I'm one of the few people who liked the Fallen Angels book, right? 'Cause in Horus Heresy. I think the Fallen Angels book gets a lot of hate because right before then we just had the amazing trilogy of Horus Rising, the amazing trilogy there, and then all of a sudden, bang, we're before the Great Crusade, essentially. But this is another picture in which you are seeing a wonderful representation of why I think the Dark Angels are so effing cool. Because their Primarch, Lionel Johnson, came to land on the planet. One of the Primarchs sent out across the world, across the galaxy by the forces of chaos. He's pulled away from the Emperor and scattered across the galaxy. He comes to land on Caliban, and he is found in his capsule and brought up by a sect of people called the Order. Now, I've always thought that one of the things I didn't like about the Dark Angels is that everything is very generic, and what I mean by that is, they could have gone ham here and said, look, we're going to create this entire culture that is here about this order of knights. So they're actually going to be called, the Knights Radiant, or they're actually going to be called the Knights of the Silver Blade, or they're actually going to be called something, not just the Order, right? Everything in the Dark Angels lore is essentially just that. It's very surface level, low effort, as far as I'm concerned. And we have the Order, and that is the knightly order that protects the lands of men on Caliban from these ravenous beasts. And that is what Lionel Johnson, he's called Lionel Johnson because he's named after a poet called Lionel Johnson. Not in the setting, this is actually a name given to him by the Games Workshop Studio. I think it's a bit weird, a bit silly, but there we go. And Lionel Johnson, I literally call him the Lion because it just works better than Lionel Johnson. But it literally means child of the forest. That's what his name literally means. And he was brought up by a man called Luther. And Luther is somebody who we'll be getting into quite a bit later on in our setting guide. But Luther is one of the leaders of the Order, and that is what Lionel Johnson is brought up in. And as all Primarchs do, as we will go from Legion to Legion, you will recognise these stories as we go along. As all Primarchs do, Lionel Johnson slowly unites his homeworld and pushes back the forces of these chaotic energy type beasts. to the point that when the Emperor arrives on Caliban, he finds a world that is still riven by beasts, but at this point, it is calm. It has several city-states that are rather large, and Lionel Johnson is a perfect fit already for his legion. Now, I want to talk about Caliban for a little bit now that I've got that lore part out of the way for now. We're going to come back to the lore in a minute once we get into the Great Crusade. One thing I really loved about Caliban are pictures like this. Right? These are pseudo-futuristic warriors with low technology, but they're still wearing technological warplate. So they're still wearing warplate that is kind of, it's titanium. It's realistic, futuristic weaponry and armor, right? But they don't really use bolt guns, they don't use energy swords, they just use really cool looking pieces of armor. I'm actually writing a setting right now called Burning Chrome, which is very, very similar. Okay, the entire world is a feudal world where the knights are dressed like this. They come from a fallen sci-fi society, and they are literally wearing armor, wearing plate armor. You can recognize it as, oh, this is a knight. But you have to look a little bit closer, because you're thinking, he looks a bit futuristic, but then you realize, oh, none of his armor's powered up. He's wearing robes, he's wielding a sword that doesn't have this fancy energy blade around it. That's what I love about Caliban. It is literally an entire world of pure warriors, of people who have to rely on next to no technology. Are there any other people that do this in the 1,000 universe? Yes. Do any of them look as cool as the Dark Angels? Not in my opinion. I mean, look at this guy. This is what I imagine Luther to have looked like. One thing about Luther, just before we get into him, is that when Lionel Johnson is taken by the Emperor and he is given command of the First Legion, because the Dark Angels were the first to be made. They are the First Legion. When he is given command of the Legion, Luther is too old to become a Space Marine. Right? He's too old. He has certain rejuvenate treatment, sure, but he's too old and too frail, really, to become a Space Marine, to become an Astartes. You need to be a lot younger than that to become an Astartes. And so, generally, what I do like about the Dark Angels story is that you get this separation of man and God. You get this separation of Lionel Johnson and Luther. Primarch destined to go and conquer the stars. A very powerful man. Destined to lead armies and maybe conquer an entire planet. But he's still only a powerful man in Luther. Jealousy begins to grow as we go throughout the next part of the Horus Heresy. Right. So, the Dark Angels Legion in space. So one thing that people are normally surprised at is that the Dark Angels used to look much cooler. The Dark Angels used to be coloured black, and they would taper their armour with reds and heraldic patterns, which I really enjoy. The Dark Angels were one of the exemplar legions in the Horus Heresy, in the Great Crusade. They conquered many planets. They went out and were essentially... There's never really a power level given to any sort of legions in the Horus Heresy, and the Great Crusade, and neither should there be. The only thing that we know for sure is that the Lunar Wolves had one of the most stellar records. That's Horus's Legion. One of the most stellar records in the Great Crusade. But the Dark Angels actually have a full history before Lionel Johnson even arrives to lead them. Okay, because they were the First Legion, so they were instrumental in unifying Terra under the Emperor, and they were instrumental in heading out into the Sol System and pushing out and taking most of the Sol System. It was the Dark Angels who were leading that charge, who were the ones at the front of these proto early wars of the Emperor's rule. As the Crusade goes on, other legions like the Lunar Wolves, the Ultramarines, Imperial Fists, those become more specialised in different areas of warfare. So the Lunar Wolves are very good at the decapitating strike. They'll come in and go straight for the jugular. The Ultramarines are very tactically flexible, and they're empire builders, right? They're people who build places, culture, The Imperial Fists are people who are fortifying areas and making sure they can resist sieges and making sure that different parts of the galaxy that are being conquered remain conquered. All of these things the Dark Angels do. The Dark Angels are built to do everything. But that makes them incredibly powerful, right? Very, very, very good warriors at many things, but masters at very few, if not any. So, as we move forward, the losses of the Dark Angels have been mounting as we've been moving forwards, and until the Rangdan genocide, which is xenocide, which is not something that is really covered in Great Crusade lore, but it is a terrible, terrible conflict in which the Dark Angels lose a lot of their numbers, and they are superseded and outpaced by people like the Lunar Wolves, who are able to not be as catastrophically hammered by what's going on. That's because the Lion isn't one of the first Primarchs to be found. Actually, Horus was, right? Officially, Horus was. And so he's able to hold his legion together and make sure that they are remaining as a single, united, cohesive force. Only after the Lion arrives does the legion start to really resemble the Dark Angels as we know them, when they start to equip themselves in this wonderful heraldry and the almost ornate levels of armor. And I actually think the secretive nature of the Dark Angels actually comes from the fact that they are quite bitter. Okay, this is a legion who were the number one legion, the first. These are the guys who were the best. And they ended up being outpaced by people who specialised in different forms of warfare. The Dark Angels didn't adapt. They became more insular. They became more bitter, right? They withdrew all of a sudden, you know. The Rangdan genocides cost them a lot of their forces. Even when the Lion eventually was rediscovered on Caliban, right? He came to a legion that was already growing reclusive and secretive towards their brothers and the other legions. And the nature of the Lion actually coincides with that a lot. The Lion is actually very reclusive himself. He's very aloof. He doesn't really speak to people. He's not very good at winning people over, right? He's actually somebody who, you know, isn't trusted by many, which we'll get into later. You know, he's not trusted by many. But the Great Crusade powers on. With the Dark Angels building up their numbers once again and becoming a powerful force within the Legiones Astartes. These are people who have a very, very, very fabulous combat record. They're not the best, you know, and a lot of people freely admit that. Even Dark Angels players will admit that. I will admit that. The Dark Angels were not the best in terms of legions. That would go to, I would say, the Lunar Wolves, most definitely, or even the Ultramarines in terms of sheer numbers of worlds conquered and areas held. But so, where do we go from here? So, all this time that the Horus Heresy is burning on, the Great Crusade is burning on, Luther is actually sent back to Caliban. Okay? He's sent back, but he then leaves. When he's sent back to Caliban, he leaves to go and aid Horus during the Zariman campaign, dealing with the rebellion of landless nobility and chaos agents, right? So that leads Luther to become... I've never actually said if Horus has turned to chaos at this point. But that leads Luther to be in the good graces of, at least to have met Horus Lupercal, who is obviously the arch traitor. Again, us coming into this, we're assuming you know a little bit about what the hell's going on with the legions and all that. So, Luther heads back to Caliban, and he heads back Because in an attack on the Invincible Reason, which is the line's flagship, Luther discovered a plot, all right, to assassinate Lionel Johnson, and he hesitated to bring it down, to stop it, or to leave Johnson to his fate through jealousy. Okay, but the Lion saw through this and knew what he'd done, which leads to an immediate rift between the two, right? And Luther is then sent back to Caliban to orchestrate recruits for the Dark Angels, which he's very good at, right? Because he's very good at ruling Caliban. On the way back, he goes to aid Horus, and then he goes back to Caliban. So, the seeds of heresy are sown in this part of our story. The seeds of heresy are definitely implanted within the Dark Angels. We now know pretty much where this splitting of the Legion is going to come. Okay? The main cool bit about the Dark Angels lore, in my opinion, is the Horus Heresy itself. Which is why I've almost ad-libbing the Horus Heresy all the way through. I've been saying Horus Heresy instead of Great Crusade, because I've wanted to get there. So, during the Horus Heresy, unfortunately, the Dark Angels are far from Terra. They're campaigning on the Gordian League Shield worlds, which is a long, long, long way away from Terra. Okay? So, we don't know what the response of Lionel Johnson was immediately to the reveal that Horus was a traitor, and also to Istvan 3 and Istvan 5. There was an incident there where, several, at least 3 Imperial legions were wiped out by traitor legions, right? We don't know quite what his response was to all of that. But his response in general, later on, right, doesn't really fill anyone with any sort of glee. Okay, this is somebody who goes with who starts fighting traitor forces. Sure, he then goes with Robert Gilliman and Sanguinius to found something called Imperial Secundus, because they have no idea whether the Emperor is still alive or whether things have been absolutely torn down and torn apart. So they declare Sanguinius as the new Emperor over in Ultramar. And they have an Imperium Secundus. They have their own little empire over there. This is not something that lasts very long, because that whole part of the story over there in the Eastern Fringes, that is something that we'll get into more when we discuss the Ultramarines later on. But in general, there is a thing called the Ruin Storm, which cuts that part of the galaxy off from everywhere else, because they don't want these 3 legions getting to Terra to help the Emperor. Because these are the Dark Angels, the Ultramarines, and the Blood Angels. These are 3 of the top tier loyalist chapters, loyalist legions. In fact, I would say they are the top tier, attacking, as in, the Imperial Fists will deny you a place, but they're not going to defeat you on their own. One of these other legions turning up would turn the entire tide of the Siege of Terra, which indeed it does, because the Dark Angels end up getting back to Terra, and they are able to hold off Horus, and the Dark Angels and Ultramarines arriving soon is what causes Horus to gamble his own life to end the rebellion favourably on his terms, a gamble which he loses, of course, and the Horus Heresy is smashed at that point. So, from this point on, that's the really cool part of the lore that I like. I know that's going to be surprising, because you think it was going to be like, oh, when he fights Conrad Kurz, yeah, that's all cool, that's all amazing, but I really like the fact that he's kept over there, that Lionel Johnson is sniffing around, trying to see who's a traitor and who isn't. He even thinks Rabut Gilliman is a traitor. He even is convinced that Rabut Gilliman is a traitor, until he meets him again. And obviously he's then, he's confirmed that Gilliman is actually not a traitor, and he's just being useless and staying around Ultramar for some reason, because he likes just ruling his own place. I know, harsh, but still, there isn't anything in the Horus Heresy to counteract that at the moment. So, hopefully something comes out pretty soon that's going to tell us that all things are cool. So, as I said, I don't want to get too far into the lore. I'm not here to do a 3-hour video on everything that happened in the Horus Heresy. But by the time of the Siege of Terra, the Line hoped to draw away traitor forces from the throne world by striking at diversionary tactics against Horus's blockade. So against Horus's blockade of Terra, essentially. As a result, the Dark Angels destroyed several traitor homeworlds, such as Chemos, Nuceria, and Barbarus. That's huge, right? So Chemos, which is the homeworld of the Emperor's Children, Nuceria, which is the homeworld of the World Eaters, and Barbarus, which is the homeworld of the Death Guard, are all destroyed by the Dark Angels. So they go over there, and there are still many Marines left on those worlds, by the way, and countless other traitor Imperial troops that are annihilated by the Dark Angels, which shows, again, the ravenous power of Lionel Johnson and what he does in terms of what his Legion is able to do. So, Corswain, who is one of I think he's the first captain of the Dark Angels at this point. So he leads a fleet that was able to reach Terra and aid the Loyalists, which is really, really cool. So certain parts of the Dark Angels fleet did actually make it to Terra. And so they rendezvoused on the Imperiata Somnium to break the traitor blockade of Terra. So Corswain and his 10,000 Dark Angels were able to land upon the Throneworld surface and recapture the Astronomicon, which is huge, because the Astronomicon, as we know, is the beacon that allows warp travel. It allows Imperial ships to travel through the warp. Okay? So, the Dark Angels did actually have a hand in the Siege of Terra. They actually were there in very low numbers. Because the Dark Angels were about 200,000 strong at this point, and only 10,000 Dark Angels make it to Terra. So, the Dark Angel main fleet, and this last bit I'm going to read directly from Lexicanum, because I really like this. I actually copied and pasted this onto my notes. So the Dark Angels main fleet was eventually able to set course for Terra. Their impending arrival, closely following that of the Ultramarines and the Space Wolves legions, who had overcome similar obstacles, forced Horus to gamble everything on a duel with the Emperor, his former master. Horus was defeated by the Emperor, although the Emperor himself was fatally wounded and had to be entombed within the life-preserving mechanism of the Golden Throne. Lionel Johnson was stricken with grief over the fact that he had not been able to protect the Emperor against Horus. After the heresy, the Dark Angels helped restore order to the Imperium. However, during this time, the Dark Angels, who'd been left behind on Caliban, became agitated at being forced to essentially babysit a backwater planet. This led to the leader of the garrison, Luther, turning to the gods of chaos, who had just been defeated with the death of their champion Horus during the heresy. Right, so, we're going to get to that in a minute. But there are two parts of the Dark Angels lore that I would like to talk about before we get there. After I've had a swig of tea. We're doing green tea now, because I'm losing weight. I need to lose about a stone, I think. So, first thing first, is that I wanted to talk about... Oh, one second. First things first, is that I wanted to talk about the rivalry between the Space Wolves and the Dark Angels. So, without getting into too much detail, essentially, in a conflict, there was a large disagreement between Lionel Johnson and Leman Russ, the Primarch of the Space Wolves, to the point that the two came to blows in a duel that lasted for several days. At the end, it was a deadlock, and Leman Russ started laughing, forgetting why they were ever fighting in the first place. Lionel Johnson took a lot of offence at this, as you may think. He walks over to Leman Russ and knocks him spark out with a punch, which is must have been the most satisfying thing anyone's ever seen, because Leman Russ, in general, is a bit of a dick. So he lays out Leman Russ, and from this point onwards, the two reconcile later on, because there are bigger fish to fry, as in Horus. But from this point onwards, the Space Wolves and the Dark Angels, whenever they meet, whenever they are a part of the same war zone, or whatever is going on, they will have a champion each, and those two champions will duel to see what the hell goes on. to first blood, just for honor. There's no death involved. At least there's not supposed to be, unless certain space wolves decide that it's going to be to the death, and they just kill somebody and they get away with it because they're space wolves. But I'll come back to that when I get into the space wolves later on. So the other part that I want to talk about of the Dark Angels is the pursuit of the Night Lords. Now, what I really like about the Night Lords is that Conrad Kurz of the Night Lords, he thinks that Sanguinius is his mirror image. He thinks that, if things were different, you'd be just like me. And he's distraught that Sanguinius isn't like him. I think he's flattering himself quite a bit. Because I actually think that Lionel Johnson is the mirror image of Conrad Kurz. Now, hear me out. Conrad Kurz is a murderous sociopath, essentially. Somebody with a broken mind that could have been turned to greatness, that instead was turned towards instilling fear in people, okay? And being reclusive, and not being close to anybody, and being that guy who literally makes sure that the wolves are kept at the door, because we have stronger wolves here behind the door, yeah? Lionel Johnson's kind of the same. He's not a sociopath. He's not strictly evil, in the sense of the word. He's not a sociopath. He doesn't go around murdering people for the sake of murdering them. But he is reclusive. And he does struggle with inner turmoil. He struggles with the turmoil that he should be the best. He struggles with the turmoil that his legion was the first, and they should be the first. They should be the best, and they're not. But I always thought, in my heart of hearts, perhaps there was something else going on with the Dark Angels that we weren't seeing. That was dispelled very recently by a Horus Heresy novel in which Lionel Johnson fights Conrad Kurz, who tries to sway him to the chaotic side. And Conrad Kurz literally says to him, look, what do you think people will say about you? You've been over here for the entire heresy in the Eastern Fringes, not coming to the Emperor's aid. Yes, because of the Ruin Storm. Yes, because you didn't even know he was alive. But still, what do you think they're going to say about your dutiful Dark Angels? You're already secretive. You're already hated, mistrusted. What are they going to say about you in future generations? To which Lionel Johnson stabs him in the gut and leans in and says, loyalty is its own reward. So, and with that, we now have a definitive answer of whether the Lion was a traitor or a loyalist. He was always a loyalist, right? He was always somebody who was on the Emperor's side. That is something I think is incredibly important. You have this ruthless killer in Conrad Kurz, and you have Lionel Johnson, who is an artistic killer. And I think that their duel says a lot about that as well. When they fight as warriors, Conrad Kurz cannot match Lionel Johnson. He just cannot match. He's going to die. He cannot match him. So he changes it up. He starts brawling with him. Two brothers brawling on the floor. And that's a fight that Conrad Kurz starts to win. Right? It ends inconclusively. Of course it does, because, Games Workshop always does that. And it's one of the main things I hate about their writing style. No one ever dies. No one ever gets any consequences for what they do, really, unless they're a minor character. If they're a minor character, you can almost guarantee they're going to die. But hey, let's just leave that where it is. So, moving on to the Great Betrayal, the Fallen. So, and the one bit of the Dark Angels lore that I think really lets everything else down. But I'll get to this in a minute. So, the Dark Angels return to Caliban, and they are set upon by Caliban's ground defences. And a war breaks out between Luther, who has turned to the Dark Gods of Chaos, and Lionel Johnson, who obviously is now beside himself, because not only did he not manage to reach the Emperor in time, but now half of his own legion has turned to Chaos. So, a cataclysmic war happens on Caliban, which is very vague. right? We don't really get much in the way of details. I'd love to get this in the Horus Heresy at some point. Doesn't look like we're going to get it in the books though, because I think with the Siege of Terror, that's how the books are going to end. But I hope we do get books later on describing how the Fallen come about. Because I'd love to read it. I'd love even more to write it, to be honest with you. But we have Lionel Johnson landing on Caliban as the world begins to break apart. Don't ask me how. A lot of things at this point in the story happen for plot convenience. So don't ask me how. The world begins to break apart, and for some reason, Luther is now as powerful, if not more powerful, than Lionel Johnson. Again, I didn't write it. Don't shoot the messenger. And he actually manages to beat Lionel Johnson with a massively powerful psychic attack. Right? So, Lionel Johnson is lying on the ground, about to be killed by Luther, who then comes to his senses and realises what he's done. And the Dark Angels have actually won the war at this point. They put down the rebellion, but the world is breaking apart. The world breaks apart. The Legion go and try and find Lionel Johnson. They don't find him. All they find is a gibbering wreck of Luther, crying that one day the Lion will return and will forgive him for what he's done. So as we now know, the Dark Angels' fortress monastery is a place called the Rock. And the Rock is essentially just a rather large piece of Caliban that is floating around in space and is actually piloted by the Legion. It's actually by the chapter. Sorry, it's actually got rather large bits of warp shield generators and Geller fields and things like that to save it as it's going through the warp. But the modern Dark Angels are formed from this bastion. They're formed from this quick, which is why they are so secretive. Their main secret is that at least half their legion fell to chaos during the Horus Heresy, and that they now hunt these fallen angels throughout the galaxy. And some of these fallen angels are a really cool part of the lore. Some of these fallen angels become mercenaries. Some of them become, just normal people, Space Marine sized, but normal blokes living out there in the galaxy. Some go on to lead Chaos War bands and live up to their reputation as chaotic despoilers, right? But they are all hunted by the Dark Angels, and the Dark Angels are obsessive in hunting them down, to the point that they will actually abandon war zones to go and chase these guys when the need arises. That's not something I want to get into too much today, but that is where we are in the Dark Angels lore. And that is one of the main reasons why my chapter, the Iron Talons, are not liked by the Dark Angels. They are one of the only Dark Angel chapters that don't hunt the Fallen. They don't see a point to it, right? One of the Fallen being, obviously, Cypher, who we can see here. So, I will get into them at a different point when I go into actual, the actual lore in the 41st millennium of the Dark Angels as going on. But that's all I wanted to cover for right now. What I wanted to say for now is, for the last 10-20 minutes, I wanted to talk about what I think works and what I think doesn't work. Because at the one exciting thing that we have right now in the Warhammer 40,000 universe is that we have things changing. For a long time in Warhammer, if you just got into Warhammer, well done, because you are at the point in time now where things are actually moving forwards with the lore and the timelines and things like that. So, we're actually at the point now where Luther has escaped his prison deep within the rock. And one of the main secrets that the Dark Angels actually have is that Lionel Johnson isn't dead. He is alive and well, sleeping within the rock. And Luther has been saying for millennia, when I get out of here, he will rise again and he will forgive me. And now Luther's gone. And there is a huge gathering of fallen angels happening somewhere in the galaxy. I think it is told where it is, but I'll have to look into it a little bit more. There is a huge gathering happening somewhere in the galaxy. And so there is a reckoning coming between the Dark Angels and the Fallen, which I think is pretty awesome. And for me, that is a heavy hint that Lionel Johnson will probably be the next Primarch to come back in the actual current timeline of Warhammer 40,000. But, moving on, what works and what doesn't? And where do the Dark Angels get their inspiration from? So, we all know that they have quote-unquote disputed loyalties, and that's been something that's been a part of the Warhammer fandom for decades now. The Dark Angels are so secretive that many other Imperial forces and players, even in the fandom, have thought for years that they were traitors. That there's even been a rumor going around that the Fallen were actually the original Dark Angels, and the Dark Angels that we know today were the traitors. Right? There was actually a strong rumor that I really liked. I actually thought, oh, that'd be a really good curveball, to have the Dark Angels that are actually fighting for the Imperium right now. They're actually the world's best deep cover agents. Or they're just penitent sinners, essentially. But those were the guys who were traitors to the Imperium. That the Fallen actually won the war on Caliban and killed Lionel Johnson. Right? Or at least imprisoned him within the rock. And that the Fallen who are out there, the Fallen quote-unquote, who are out there hiding from the Dark Angels, are actually the loyalists, the remaining loyalists who know their secret. That would have been... That's how I would have written it, actually. If it was given to me, I would have had, the 40k Dark Angels. Yeah, those are the traitors. But they're penitent, right? They're penitent traitors. They're not traitors who, and a lot of these guys aren't even the traitors. A lot of these guys have been inducted into the Dark Angels thousands of years after those guys have already died. So But the Dark Angels of the setting would be founded on traitors, is how I would look at it. It would be so much more interesting. But those disputed loyalties were central to the aesthetic of the Dark Angels, and them having these hoods and them having these quite secretive societies, wheels within wheels within wheels within wheels, that you'll notice. Another thing you'll notice are quite a lot of Arthurian themes within the Dark Angels lore. And the way that they go after the beasts that rule their world, the way that they fight against corruption of all types, and the fact that they don't really care who knows whether they're loyal or not in the setting. That is something that is incredibly Arthurian and incredibly one of the key aspects of the Round Table Tales, is that you do things because they're right. You don't do things because you'll get praise for them. And that's what I really like about the Dark Angels, because they deserve every single bit of praise that can be heaped upon anybody, but they don't get any, because no one trusts them. And that's just fine by them, because they have their own insular little society, and they don't want you in there anyway, right? Knightly orders also have a huge aspect in the Warhammer 40,000 setting in general. You have the Black Templars, you have, the Grey Knights, obviously, but the Dark Angels, I would say, are probably the most knightly, quote-unquote, the most feudalistic knightly order Space Marines out there, or anyone in the setting, actually. These guys are literally Knights Templar. Literally. If you look at the way they dress, you look at the robes that they have, you look at the way that they approach their societies within their chapter. Within the Dark Angels chapter, if you've ever heard of something called the Masonic Lodge, that is in the real world, right? You have... If you've ever read a Dan Brown book, if you've ever, the Da Vinci Code, things like that, the Knights Templar, all these different conspiracy theories, all of these have a home in the Dark Angels ethos. All of these have a home in the weird, insular, secretive, modal operations of the Dark Angels overall, which I really like. I really like the fact that they lent into that. I really like the fact that they lent into the fact that, look at the Knights Templar in the real world, who were rumoured to have smuggled vast amounts of treasure out of the Holy Land, some of which were relics of Christ that could even be like the true cross and things like that, right? Those are rumours, those are legends of the Knights Templar in the real world, where they smuggled these things out of the Holy Land and into Europe. And they're now there, just waiting for us to go and uncover them in these different places, in these different abbeys, and these different churches, right? Well, what do the Dark Angels have? They have a secret of their own. They have Lionel Johnson lying at the centre of their own fortress monastery that they keep secret because they don't want people knowing what happened. They don't want people knowing that most of them, well, at least, half of them turned to chaos. Okay? And when we come full circle here, what is Lionel Johnson's and the Dark Angels as a whole? What is their biggest fear? Not being the best, not being the first, not being the example to everybody else. So think about the shame that is brought upon them, not just by not making it to the Siege of Terror in numbers and not protecting the Emperor, but in letting their own homeworld fall, and not just that, half of their legion fall to chaos. Imagine the shame. Before anybody judges them on, oh yeah, just secretly, blah, blah, blah. Just imagine that deep shame, the deep-rooted shame that is in there. And that's why I think it works. What I think doesn't work is the generic nature of the Dark Angels. And I've already said in one of my other Lore Talk videos back in the day, which is basically this is replacing now, is how I would change them. How I would fix the Dark Angels. So how I would fix the Dark Angels is that I would have the Dark Angels, the Primarchs of the Primarch of the Dark Angel is actually two Primarchs. So instead of Alpharius and Omegon being the only twins, in the Alpha Legion, being the only twins, but they're secret twins, I would have the Dark Angels, because they were the first Legion, and Lionel Johnson was the first Primarch, I would actually think that the Emperor, when he made Lionel Johnson, he made an heir, and he made a spare. He made two Primarchs, right? One would become called Lionel Johnson, and the other would become called Luther. They would crash land separately on Caliban. And eventually, they would have two very different upbringings. The Lion, his story doesn't really change. He's in the woods. He's fighting beasts from a very early age. He's like this barbarian king, and he gets taken in by the Order and becomes one of their most famous knights. But they're not alone in that. There is an empire on Caliban. I would actually call it the Calibanite Empire or something like that. And Luther is found by the emperor of that empire that covers, let's say, a quarter of the world's surface. And he's brought up in imperial luxury. And Luther isn't really... He's a good warrior. But what Luther actually is an extremely, extremely, extremely powerful psyker. I'm talking almost Magnus levels of power. He is an extremely powerful psyker. And he becomes heir apparent to this empire. But his dad is a bit of a lunatic. He's a bit of a Caligula, right? He's a bit of a bad example of an emperor. He starts ruling in ways that people wouldn't enjoy. He starts annihilating entire habitation zones and getting rid of entire populations and driving the chaos beasts to different parts of the world so that they're not in his land anymore. And of course the Order then rises up and fights him. It says, no, this isn't right. And the Lion ends up leading the Order against this emperor. And at the climactic battle of this civil war on Caliban, the first civil war on Caliban, don't forget, there's going to be another one, we actually have Lionel Johnson and Luther meeting for the first time and fighting, but realizing almost on a genetic level, wait, I remember you. You were in that pod with me. We broke up over the world because it exploded, but you were in that pod with me, right? They sort of drop their weapons and look at each other and they start talking. And the battle just stops around them. And eventually, Luther is brought around to being like, yeah, he's right. Like, Lionel Johnson, this guy's right. I can't follow this. I can't follow my father anymore. So they turn around and they depose this emperor. And Luther becomes emperor of this new empire. And Lionel Johnson becomes the leader of his armies, his main general-in-chief. Right? And this stays the same until the Emperor's arrival. And with the Emperor's arrival, he decides, in his wisdom, that only one Primarch should really lead the Dark Angels. They don't need two. That'd be, a bit overpowered, if you know what I'm saying, right? So, and a lot of the other legions will be thinking, why have they got two? So he says, no, what we'll do is we will create another Ultramar. So here, I want Luther, I want you to stay and start conquering the territory around Caliban, right? Build your empire under me, with my support. You will also recruit new Dark Angels for the expeditionary force that's going to be sent out from Caliban, that Lionel Johnson will lead as its Primarch. And that's how we go for the rest of the Horus Heresy, right? We have and the two brothers are exactly the same, but I would actually make Luther more jovial. So you got Lionel Johnson's the much more serious and taciturn brother, and Luther is a lot more jovial, a lot more happy-go-lucky, and he's a much loved emperor of this world, of these worlds. But as time goes on, and words of the victories of Lionel Johnson reach Caliban, Luther starts to think, I've only conquered 10 worlds because there was only 10 worlds to conquer around me. But Lion's killing, bringing thousands of worlds into the Imperial truth. Jealousy starts to grow. Not from nothing. Brotherly jealousy. What starts the Horus Heresy in the first place? Brotherly jealousy. Starts to grow. Until finally, I would actually say, towards the end of the the outbreak of the Horus Heresy, Caliban is beset on all sides by demons, right? So it's invaded because I would say that the beasts underneath are coming from underneath Caliban's surface. And so what nobody realizes is that there are warp rifts in the center of this world, in the center of Caliban, that are spawning these beasts. And now they're on overdrive because the Horus Heresy is kicking off. And so all of a sudden the beasts are now invading in massive numbers and tearing down the Empire. And Luther is calling out constantly, psychically, to Lionel Johnson, please come and help me. We're fucking dying here. I need your help. I need your help. I need your help. And he's fighting and he's fighting and he's fighting. Meanwhile, Lionel Johnson's story doesn't really change. He's been back a few times to see his brother, and they've become more estranged as time has gone on. But he's still an Ultramar, right? He's still behind the Ruinstorm. He can't hear any of this, right? And eventually, when he does hear it, it's too late. He's already making his way towards Terra, because he's faced with a terrible choice. Do I go to Caliban to see my brother when I know he's probably already dead and Caliban's probably already destroyed? Or do I go and try and save the Emperor? And again, loyalty is its own reward. He goes to try and save the Emperor. And he arrives just as he does in the normal Horus Heresy. Too late to save the Emperor. He heads back to Caliban. And again, essentially the same story plays out. In the time that he's been away, in his absolute agony and pain of seeing all people he's ever loved die, Luther trades his soul to the Chaos gods for the chance to save Caliban. And so Luther thinks he's created this wondrous paradise in Caliban, this wondrous new empire, just in the space of a couple of years, with a snap of his fingers. What Lionel Johnson sees is a demon world, essentially. So he orders his forces to have an orbital bombardment as he goes down there to find out what happened to his brother and to claim his brother's body, because he thinks his brother is dead. Little does he know, he comes across Luther, and Luther isn't dead. He's leading this vast force of corrupted legionaries, Astartes, and of demons. And a second Horus Heresy breaks out on Caliban that destroys the planet. And we end up with exactly the same story that we have right now. Where, Luther beats Lionel Johnson psychically, and, Lionel Johnson ends up within the rock, and Luther escapes when we're in the current timeline, right? So, with only a few changes there, I've made this not generic, right? We have, in the normal 40k timeline, we have a generic thing called the Order that Lionel Johnson goes down. He's called in by a guy called Luther, who's just a man, and somehow this man is charged by the powers of chaos and beats a fucking Primarch. Are you shitting me? This man is not even an Astartes, as we covered right at the start of this video. Luther's not an Astartes. He's just a guy. He's just some dude. He's not even a Psyker. And he manages to unleash this psychic attack that almost kills stone dead a Primarch. It's nonsense, quite frankly, and it's lazy writing. And I think this Dark Angels lore, it's what's in my head, right? I subscribe to it. It's my canon lore in my head. You know, the Iron Talons, my own chapter, they follow the normal 40k lore, but in my heart, they don't. In my heart, you know, they you know, I'll get into that at another time. But that's how I would change the Dark Angels going into Warhammer 40,000. That's how I would change them. So, we're getting up to the hour mark now. I love you all. You are all the best people in the world. You're making sure that, you know, in these days where I'm, you know, at home with Grandpa's got COVID, so I can't even be at school and things like that. In these days that are pretty trying, you're keeping me sane, and I thank you very much for that. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Next time we'll be covering the Emperor's Children. It might not be as long as this one, because they are very two-note, you know. There's not as much going on with the Emperor's Children, which is fine, by the way. I actually think the Emperor's Children lore is better than the Dark Angels lore. It's more succinct. You don't have to write loads to tell a good story. You know, the lore and the background of the Emperor's Children is much more succinct and lovely than the Dark Angels is. But thank you very, very, very much for watching. And if you're curious, your own chapter's video, if you're stuck to the end, your homebrew chapter video will look something like this. Won't be as long, obviously, because there won't be as much to go over, but it will look something like this. So hopefully you guys are all looking forward to that. Thank you very, very, very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Have a good one. Happy painting.